An evening in Sangam, Seoul set the scene outside a lit building. Inside, a streamer arranged his camera and chat overlays before going live. He greeted his audience with energy and introduced a requested mukbang featuring honey chicken. He dug in, narrated every bite, and praised the food as good. Midstream, he rolled up his sleeve and pressed at his inner forearm while viewers reacted on screen. He spoke to the chat as he inspected his skin and prepared to continue the broadcast. An evening in Sangam framed the streamer's apartment and camera gear. He drank from a can and inspected his inner forearm. A sudden memory cut to a battlefield and to brutal gym drills. He gasped as past tests and minor injuries surfaced. Panels showed him training with two other men under a trainer named Choi Kang-hyuk. A title identified Choi as the nation's best fitness trainer. The sequence returned to the present. He read the chat and prepared himself to resume the broadcast. He replayed the flashback like a sudden film cut. He had trained under Choi Kang-hyuk through harsh drills and tests. A title card labeled Choi as the nation's best fitness trainer. The memory shifted back to the present apartment and his livestream setup. He inspected his forearm and scrolled the chat while drinking. He read viewers' messages and steadied his voice to resume broadcasting. He went on air, flexed for the camera, and promised to return tomorrow. He ended the stream with a tired smile and closed the broadcast. He flinched and then forced a breath while inspecting scattered items on the table. Pills, an empty mug, and a small box sat between him and the camera. He told himself he would rest today and tried to calm his pulse. At the clinic, the doctor read the test sheet and diagnosed hair loss caused by stress. The diagnosis felt final and unnerved him. A flash of Choi Kang-hyuk's stern stance returned from memory and sharpened his worry. The doctor advised he reduce his training intensity and manage stress. He left with a taut jaw and a quiet promise to try. He left the clinic with a taut jaw and a quiet promise to rest. The doctor had read the tests and bluntly said he would become bald. The words felt final and brought back Choi Kang-hyuk's stern face. He pictured a bald future and then imagined being forever alone. Panic rose and he checked his hair at home, flexing at his reflection to find calm. He tried to steady his breath and decide what to do next. A soft knock came at the door and he froze, uncertain. Choi Kang-hyuk thumbed through a list of videos on his phone in silence. Thumbnails and titles pulled him back to the small rituals of his childhood. He remembered sending watch links, crowded living rooms, and street games after school. Those memories eased his panic and became a quiet, steadier beat for a moment. He found an author credit in the interface and recognized the name instantly. A new series banner appeared and his attention sharpened despite his worry. He tapped the thumbnail hoping for distraction and some small reassurance now. Choi Kang-hyuk thumbed through thumbnails on his phone and paused at a familiar name. He found an author credit that matched Gae-in Soo and opened the new series on impulse. The images filled his screen and a slow smile spread across his face. He breathed out and felt an odd calm settle into his shoulders. Memory cut in and he recalled cramped living rooms and shared watch links from childhood. A scene showed him among stacks of books and a small boy reading with family. He sat back while the nostalgia softened his panic and steadied him. Choi Kang-hyuk had opened the webcomic and let the nostalgia steady his breath. He thumbed through panels until his eyes grew heavy and the room dimmed. He fell asleep on the floor with his phone face up beside him. A bright notification pierced the dark and a thin beam crossed the room. Someone whispered his name and then a loud voice demanded morning workout. He started awake, heart quick, legs already moving promptly toward the doorway. The shout left no choice. He rose to meet the command and to train. Choi Kang-hyuk had slept with a webcomic and his phone until a bright notification cut the dark. A shouted command jolted him awake in a cramped training hall filled with motion and noise. A quick panel showed a masked face and a snapped bootstrap. A bald trainee yelled they'd be last and flailed in panic as others urged haste. Choi paused and wondered who had shaved that boy's head. Someone asked his name, and a profile card confirmed his identity. The card listed Choi Kang-hyuk, personal trainer, past Special Forces. He rose and moved toward the doorway to join them. Choi Kang-hyuk had slept near his phone until a bright notice woke him. He entered the cramped training hall and froze at a shaved trainee. A voice asked if the boy's eyes hurt, and Choi narrowed his gaze at the profile card. The trainee flailed, shouted, and suddenly bolted. He sprinted across the wooden floor toward the doorway while others stared. The boy yelled about the old training house as Choi moved to follow. Choi entered the cramped hall and stopped when he saw the shaved trainee's wide eyes. The boy murmured that someone had called him "my son" and held that thought like a talisman. A phone screen displayed a livestream profile labeled with Choi Kang-hyuk and scrolling viewer comments. Viewers called the moment touching, while the trainee's expression shifted from fear to stubborn pride. He squared his shoulders, exchanged a glance with the other trainee, and set his jaw. They moved quickly toward the exit, pushed by an unspoken decision to follow the trainer. Choi watched, measuring the boy's resolve and cataloging what the livestream had revealed. Choi Kang-hyuk had watched the shaved trainee brace and follow the others toward the exit. A furious voice cut through the hall, calling them late and promising a lesson. The trainees snapped to action and ran to their places under the order. Young trainee cried out an apology and admitted how the break felt real. He tried to hold onto that small steadiness while the room tightened around the threat of punishment. The livestream hummed in the background as Choi measured the boy's resolve and noted what the stream kept revealing. Choi Kang-hyuk observed the shaved trainee brace and move with the others down the hall. The hall echoed with strained breathing and the scrape of knees on tile. Trainees pushed through sharp knee pain as they attempted the forced positions. Young trainee flinched, then froze, confusion slowly spreading across his face and eyes. An inner question broke his thought as he mouthed, "What the hell?" A harsh voice cut through the noise to warn them about wrecked knees. The livestream hummed in the background while Choi noted the trainee's strain and stance. The scene tightened around the warning and the trainee's growing realization. Young trainee barked orders and drove the group into a horse stance. He announced they would begin with the horse stance and kept his voice sharp. The camera cut to his profile against the skyline as he forced a steady posture. Trainees planted feet and pushed through burning knees on the tile. Repeated groans punctured the hall while bodies held the forced position. Close-ups showed sweat and clenched teeth and eyes wide with shock. Choi Kang-hyuk had observed the strain and noted a trainee freeze in confusion. The trainee thought his knees would be wrecked if training continued like this. The page ended on a bold training title card. After the title card, the scene shifted to raw strength drills in the gym. A trainee lunged under a loaded barbell while others gripped the pull-up bar and strained. A bald leader stepped forward and shouted that the locker room was martial arts foundation. He declared that a true gym-goer could not tolerate weakness or sloppy balance. Trainees exchanged puzzled looks and tightened grips as his voice pushed them harder. Some hesitated, uncertain of his extreme demands, while others steeled themselves to obey. The leader urged them to discard doubt and practice strict posture, footwork, and control. The page ended on a shot of the group, ready to follow his orders. After the earlier drills, the group stayed under the leader's watchful eye. The bald trainee strode forward and declared it was only happening within a dream. He erupted into a furious tirade, calling the others ignorant and unfit in training. The trainees flinched and exchanged shocked looks as he berated them and demanded stricter posture and discipline. He shoved one forward, barked orders, and forced the group into formation. The men hesitated briefly, then obeyed his harsh command to take up their positions at once. After the earlier drills, the group remained under the leader's watchful and strict eye. The bald trainee strode forward and declared the matter belonged only to a dream. He erupted into a furious tirade, accusing them of ignorance and weak posture. He shoved one man forward and forced the group into tight formation. Then he said he needed to speak the truth about their Shaolin training methods. He challenged the tradition and demanded change from the instructors and elders. The trainees flinched and exchanged shocked looks but remained in their position. The room filled with tense silence as arguments simmered beneath his words. After the drills, the group stood under the leader's watchful eye and silence settled. The young trainee strode forward and dismissed the matter as only a dream. He erupted into a tirade, accusing the others of ignorance and weak posture. He shoved one man forward and forced the group into a tight formation. He demanded to speak the truth about their Shaolin training methods and tradition. He argued harsh drills train the body to forge a disciplined mind. The trainees flinched and exchanged shocked looks while silence deepened in the hall. His final shout made his intent clear and forced the room to reckon. After the drills, the young trainee stepped forward and demanded answers from the group. He accused them of ignorance and weak posture and attacked their training as dishonest. He shoved a man and forced everyone into a tight formation. He shouted that harsh drills forged a disciplined mind. The trainees flinched and fell silent. A large, muscular man moved in to confront him and was thrown backward. The hall tensed as shock rippled through the ranks. The senior then pointed to another monk, and the room braced for a new verdict. The young trainee stepped forward and forced the group into a tight formation. He berated them for weak posture and for dishonest training methods. A senior moved forward to intervene and pointed toward another defiant monk. The young trainee inhaled deeply, shouted, and unleashed an explosive outward breath. The blast struck the confronting man and hurled him backward across the hall. Trainees staggered and pressed together as shock and fear rippled through the ranks. The view pulled back to reveal the wide temple courtyard and the assembled witnesses. From the rear, a single voice said it had heard everything. Following the trainee's explosive breath and the courtyard's stunned witnesses, two monks faced one another. The senior argued that changing forms were mere tools and not the objective. He insisted their martial arts served a practical purpose, to rescue the masses. He said they protected people from evil and from those who harassed them. The young trainee chuckled, then bristled at the charge of complacency. The senior watched him closely and thought the child was different and steady. That judgment left the trainee staring upward and hinting at a private resolve. After the courtyard's stunned silence, the two monks faced one another and squared off. The senior insisted forms were tools and not the ultimate aim of training. He argued their skill existed to rescue people and stop those who harmed them. The young trainee bristled at complacency and kept a quiet, steady resolve. The senior then challenged him to prove it against opponents taught the Shaolin method. He demanded the trainee try to win against those trained that way. The trainee flinched and asked if he must defeat the senior. The senior replied the true test was whether the trainee could save people in danger. He stepped forward and forced the trainee to choose action. After the senior insisted that forms were tools and training saved people, a test followed. He pointed to a tall monk and ordered the young trainee to spar him. The courtyard hushed while the other monks formed a rough circle and watched. The young trainee blinked, voice trembling as he asked if he must win. The senior said victory mattered less than the ability to save lives in combat. He named the opponent and leaned forward, forcing the trainee to decide. The trainee swallowed and quietly squared his shoulders beneath the setting sun. He accepted the order without argument and prepared to prove his readiness. After the senior had set the sparring test, the courtyard hummed with whispers. The young trainee watched a taller monk while murmurs questioned his ability. He vowed to prove himself after a week and bowed as the senior called the trainee by name, Jin. The assembly uttered a quiet Amitabha. The senior then commanded the monks to begin. Voices rose as trainees scrambled into formation. The senior barked corrections and enforced discipline. The young trainee steadied his stance for the trial under the sinking sun. The senior set the sparring test, and the courtyard tightened into a charged hush. Monks formed ranks and whispered doubts at the new trainee's boldness. A taller monk shoved closer, and other trainees muttered insults under their breath. Jin stared back and set his jaw against their scorn. He vowed to prove himself within 7 days and refused to cower. The senior watched with a rigid face, then announced the trial's week deadline. The assembly erupted with brisk movement, while Jin steadied his stance for the coming tests. After the senior announced the 7-day trial, the monks arranged into strict training lines. Jin steadied his breath and palms as he repeated basic forms with quiet focus. Taller trainees shifted forward and whispered insults behind their hands. A senior voice barked his name, and others stepped near to push him. The crowd's taunts layered into steady pressure against his concentration. Jin held his gaze and answered only with posture and determined control. He recalled his vow to prove himself that week and let discipline speak through movement. Practice continued under the hot sky. The senior ordered the 7-day trial, and the monks formed strict training lines. Jin steadied his breath and repeated basic forms with quiet focus. Taller trainees whispered insults and shifted forward to push him. A senior barked his name, and others crowded near. Jin answered with posture and steady control, and he recalled his vow to prove himself. The compound fell into a unified chant of Namo Amitabha. After practice, they filed to the dining hall and received plain bowls of rice and greens. Jin looked at the meager portions and felt a stunned question. The senior's order began the trial, and the monks maintained strict training lines. After practice, they filed to the dining hall and received plain bowls. Jin sat with his back straight and stared at the simple meal. The tray held rice, a bowl of greens, and pickled vegetables. The monks chanted Namo Amitabha and offered thanks for the meal. Jin felt surprised and puzzled by his reaction to the food. A smell rose from the tray, and it seemed unusually appetizing. He closed his eyes and judged the scent, then tried to dismiss it. He admitted the smell was good, but told himself they were still vegetables. Jin remained seated and examined the simple meal and its unexpected scent. Young trainee burst out, accusing the meal of being child abuse. The senior immediately ordered no talking and enforced silence during eating. Trainees protested that they had trained all morning and deserved better. The argument escalated into insults about harshness and vegetables. One trainee threatened to teach them a lesson and then vowed not to let it go. The dining hall grew tense as voices clashed and resolve hardened. Tensions had risen in the dining hall after trainees argued over the meager communal meal. Voices clashed and a hard silence settled as everyone braced for more conflict. A hall leader cleared his throat and entered to interrupt the brewing fight. The bald trainee glared up at him with suspicion and fierce stubbornness in his eyes. The leader announced himself as Hyun-mun and explained he took care of meals here. He smiled and offered extra portions to any trainee who remained hungry after training. The trainee answered he had enough already and refused more with loud certainty. The leader kept his calm tone and let the hall fall into attentive silence. After a tense silence, Hyun-mun repeated his offer and specified chicken breasts as extra portions. The trainees stared dumbfounded and then erupted into shocked voices. A pair of younger monks whispered about protein and muscle with growing urgency. One trainee shouted that they needed protein to recover from training. The bald young trainee lowered his eyes into his bowl and suddenly saw a muscular reflection. He felt an odd shift in his body and froze as nervous doubt spread through the hall. After the brief silence, the young trainee smelled food and blinked in confusion. He questioned whether the moment belonged to waking life or to a dream. He noticed a stronger reflection and saw his body look more muscular than before. He froze in place as doubt and surprise spread through his whole chest. He apologized aloud, saying he had acted odd from hunger and that he had misspoken. Hyun-mun and the nearby monks exchanged quick looks and reacted with quiet concern. A large monk offered a brief reassurance and an apology for causing alarm. The hall returned to cautious calm as the trainees refocused on their meals. The young trainee spoke up and asked for beans and mushrooms at the table. The request hung in the room and drew the monks' quiet stares. Some faces tightened, and a murmured thought labeled him as crazy. Jin observed the ripple of reaction and judged a problem required solving. The trainee flushed and stammered, but held to his request despite the scrutiny. Conversation fell into tense whispers as trainees exchanged worried glances. The young trainee's private worry about getting back home surfaced under the pressure. The hall settled into guarded calm while leaders weighed what to do next. The young trainee had asked for beans and mushrooms at the table earlier that day. The request hung in the room and drew the monks' quiet stares. Faces tightened and murmurs labeled him odd while Jin watched the ripple. The trainee flushed and stammered, but kept his words despite their scrutiny. Later he experienced a sudden inner vision of a golden figure filling his view. A bright hand extended, and he cried out, startling the nearby trainees into silence. Faces blurred around him, then lined up as he steadied himself and resolved to pass. The young trainee had asked for beans and mushrooms earlier that day and endured curious stares. Monks murmured and tightened their faces while Jin watched the ripple. He flushed, experienced a vision of a golden figure, and cried out. Faces blurred, then lined up as he steadied himself and resolved to pass. Later the hall erupted into debate. Senior monks urged one man to apologize in his stead. A leader proposed a spar with Mu Jin after 7 days to settle the claim. The trainee listened while elders decided his path. The senior monks walked the corridor and argued over how to handle the young trainee. They noted the temple recruited hundreds each year and that most did not last. Many recruits failed the harsh training and were sent to minor sects instead. The new disciples were brought to the main temple, shaved and lined in the yard. Earlier the young trainee had drawn attention with a vision and a sudden outcry. Among the new novices, Yui Sung stood ready to begin training. The senior monks appointed Mu Gung to confront the troublesome recruit in the yard. Mu Gung emerged with glowing eyes and a silent, threatening posture that darkened the hall. They declared he would teach that child a harsh lesson without mercy. The young trainee met Mu Gung's stare with steady eyes and clenched resolve. Tension spread through the novices as the senior monks watched with low, decisive voices. The decision shifted the training into punishment, and the yard braced for the first action. Mu Gung's boots scraped the stone as he closed the short distance to the trainee. A senior monk signaled and ordered the two novices to prepare for sparring. The pair stepped into the yard and faced one another with steady eyes. A close shot showed one novice's expression and his questioning glance. He asked aloud what they were doing and drew a breath. Novices nearby froze in their places and followed every motion. The yard stilled under the weight of expectation, and the seniors watched as the contest prepared to begin. Mu Gung had closed the short distance to the trainee as a senior monk signaled readiness. The two novices stepped into the yard and faced one another with steady eyes. One asked aloud about extension, and they read a posted instructional panel detailing stretching benefits and joint care. The pair followed the guidance with slow extensions and controlled breaths, easing limbs and protecting joints. Nearby trainees froze and watched every motion. The seniors observed without sound as the yard held its tension and the pair completed their warm-up before the contest. Mu Gung had closed the short distance as the senior had signaled readiness and the novices had squared off. One novice launched a heavy punch that connected with blunt force and sent the yard into shocked silence. Nearby trainees froze and viewers hummed with surprise at the impact. The struck trainee staggered and clenched his jaw, pain and doubt flashing across his face. He asked himself how to win and scanned the yard for options. He then recalled the posted stretching and joint guidance and found a plan. The trainee steadied his stance and prepared to use that technique. Mu Gung closed the short distance while the senior raised his hand and the novices took positions. A heavy punch had landed earlier and silence had settled across the yard. One trainee had staggered and searched for an answer amid the shock. He remembered the posted joint and stretching guidance and planned a defensive technique. Night fell and monks moved through the yard while trainees watched from shadows. The trainee practiced alignments and steady breathing beneath a low roof until dawn. At first light, the senior and Mu Gung observed, without comment from the compound steps. The trainee tightened his stance, released a sharp ki, and moved to test the technique. Mu Gung closed the short distance while the senior raised his hand and novices took positions. A heavy punch had silenced the yard. The trainee staggered and then practiced alignment and steady breathing beneath a low roof until dawn. At first light, the senior and Mu Gung watched from the compound steps. The trainee tightened his stance, released a sharp ki, and tested the new defensive technique. He met the elder's gaze, felt a quiet contempt, and hardened his resolve. He promised himself to prove the training and moved forward to demonstrate. The senior signaled, and the sparring bout began beneath the compound sun. Mu Gung closed distance and launched a fast, precise strike without hesitation. The young trainee blinked, stunned by the tempo and the sudden force. He tried to mirror the defensive drill he had practiced until dawn. His timing failed. Mu Gung's blow carried him across the training mat. Silence held as elders and novices watched the brief, harsh lesson silently. He hit the ground, tasted failure, and vowed to learn the movement. The senior signaled, and the bout moved under the compound sun. Mu Gung closed distance and struck with precise speed. The young trainee tried to copy practice defenses, but missed his timing and staggered. Mu Gung seized the opening, charged forward, and tackled him to the mat. The pair hit ground and rolled, while the training yard fell silent. Mu Gung transitioned smoothly into an armbar, isolating the trainee's elbow and wrenching it for control. The young trainee cried out and thrashed briefly. The lesson ended with pain and a vow to improve. The senior signaled, and the bout moved onto the training mat. Mu Gung closed the distance and struck with precise speed. The young trainee misjudged timing and staggered under the hit. Mu Gung seized the opening, charged, and tackled him to the floor. They fell and rolled while the yard went silent. Mu Gung isolated the trainee's elbow and locked an armbar for control. The trainee cried out and thrashed, then went still as pain took hold. Nearby trainees shouted and clustered at the edge, declaring he had been subdued. The lesson ended in pain and a quiet vow to improve. Mu Gung held the trainee down and maintained the armbar to keep control. He leaned in and spoke sharply, demanding the trainee stop resisting immediately. The yard echoed with creaks as other trainees shifted and shouted for order. Senior barked at the crowd to stand back and let the staff handle it. The trainee writhed and gasped between shallow breaths, eyes squeezing against pain. He called Mu Gung's name once, voice raw, as if pleading for mercy. Mu Gung pressed harder until the sound cut off with a single pained cry. A distant wind carried that cry across the training grounds, and then silence. Mu Gung maintained the armbar until Mu Jin twisted and escaped the hold. Mu Jin reversed position and forced Mu Gung to release his grip. The training yard erupted in shouts while trainees reacted, and one voice apologized loudly. A graphic panel announced the morning match between Mu Jin and Mu Gung. The final panel declared Mu Jin the victor and left Mu Gung staring, breathing hard. Silence settled briefly before the group began to regroup around the outcome. Mu Gung had held an armbar until Mu Jin twisted free and reversed position. Mu Jin forced Mu Gung to release the hold. The training yard erupted with shouts and one loud apology. A graphic declared the morning match and named Mu Jin the victor. Mu Gung stared, breathing hard, as silence settled briefly. Trainees regrouped around the outcome. The frame then shifted to a minimal white credits page. The CNC Revolution logo and Midnight Studio name appeared alongside Korean staff listings, marking the chapter's end. After the morning match and credits, the page flipped to a manual titled Chain Punch. The guide listed the fist, elbow, and shoulder as the main weapons and stressed short-range speed. It explained how the sequence allowed a practitioner to quickly disable an opponent in close quarters. New Gung had mastered the chain punch and applied it cleanly during drills. His opponents collapsed with minimal resistance and were described by observers as pathetically lost. Second-class disciples watched in quiet admiration while a strange young monk's odd techniques remained unexplained. After drills ended, the group relaxed near the training pond and sat in small clusters. A brash disciple stood and shouted that he could beat anyone in a fair fight. Mu Gung agreed aloud, which drew uneasy laughter and a few scoffs from others. A senior cleared his throat to restore order, forcing the hall into sudden silence. He told them Mu Gung did have a point and watched for reactions. Two trainees met each other's gaze across the water, while onlookers murmured among themselves. Mu Gung stayed silent and observed, his posture unchanged as tension settled around the group. After the drills, the group's uneasy calm snapped when a brash disciple rose and accused someone of breaking a rule. The accusation drew shocked stares, and a young trainee froze in disbelief. The discussion centered on whether the chain punch had been used. The trainee admitted he had used a chain punch to break an opponent's guard. The hall reacted with protest and disbelief, while Mu Gung watched without movement. Tension rose after the drills when a brash disciple accused someone of breaking a rule. The accusation drew shocked stares, and the young trainee froze in place. He admitted using a chain punch earlier to break an opponent's guard. The panels showed how he controlled his arm and fired the technique to pry his limb free. He did not aim for the head. His forearm was cut and blood ran, prompting louder protest from the hall. Mu Gung watched without moving as onlookers demanded judgment. Instead of condemnation, the senior monk smiled, silencing the crowd and deepening unease. After the drills, the hall stayed charged with accusation and hurt. The brash disciple's claim had cut the young trainee's forearm and agitated the crowd. The senior called Mu Jin forward, praised his adherence to Shaolin technique, and declared him the duel's winner. Shock spread through the onlookers and voices rose in disbelief, but the senior silenced them with a measured smile. He then issued a caveat and announced he would personally show Mu Jin the essence of Shaolin's martial arts. The promise deepened unease and left the hall silent and wary. After the duel, the hall remained charged and wary under the senior's quiet promise. He raised his voice and spoke of Shaolin power that could fell demonic heads. He ordered a heavy boulder brought forward and told them to watch closely. Young trainees strained to lift and to position the rock as the hall watched. The senior then struck the boulder with an unleashed chain punch to demonstrate real force. Stone shuddered and dust flew while disciples gasped at the visible impact. Mu Jin and the others watched as the senior declared the chain punch's true power. After his promise, the senior readied himself and tightened his stance before the boulder. His eyes widened and his fist began to glow with concentrated force. He drew breath and let out a guttural shout as he launched the chain punch. The glowing fist slammed into the boulder and sent a shock through the stone. The rock fractured and shards tore through the air toward the hall floor. Disciples staggered backward while dust filled the chamber and onlookers shielded their faces. Mu Jin and the trainees watched the strike without speaking. When the dust settled, rubble covered the floor. After the strike fractured the boulder, the hall filled with shouting and laughter. Trainees erupted into praise and compared the impact to legends they had heard. One young monk grinned, fists clenched, his heart racing at the sight. He whispered that the technique was real martial arts and vowed to train harder. Others voiced the same hope, imagining matching the senior's force. Mu Jin and the remaining trainees watched, their ambition sharpened by the display. Dust lay across the floor while onlookers pointed, and the senior observed the disciples' new resolve. A narration declared martial arts could break a mountain with one strike. Panels showed a sword swing toppling ranks and a punch creating an explosion. The trainees erupted in shouts as the boulder split and a crater formed. One young monk stared, bewildered, then hesitated before speaking to Hai Yung. Hai Yung blinked and stammered an uncertain reply under the open sky. Onlookers whispered about the single blow's power while dust settled. The senior observed silently as trainees' ambition hardened into resolve. The demonstration ended, and a smoking crater marked the ground where the blow landed. Trainees fell silent and murmured as they backed away from the split stone. A young monk stammered a halting reply to Hai Yung, while the senior maintained a careful watch. Morning came and leaders gathered in the training hall to review the event. A report confirmed Mu Jin had felled Mu Gung with one technique. Hyun Sung listened with a tight expression and called the youth no ordinary recruit. Another leader dismissed the child as arrogant while the group weighed the risks. After the crater and the report, mourning in the hall hardened into argument. Elders examined whether Mu Jin had learned the cane punch to find fatal weak points. Hyun Sung and others traded cautious remarks while a senior raised darker possibilities. A leader suggested the boy might be a spy for an underground alliance or a demonic cult. The suspicion settled over the council. Faces tightened and the child watched with a small smirk, which only fed the elders' alarm and left the leaders divided on how to respond. Morning argument hardened into accusation as elders considered the boy's motives and origin. They debated whether Mu Jin had been sent as a spy from an outside force. A senior proposed continued observation rather than immediate punishment to gather proof. Others suggested the child might belong to a martial family or to an underground alliance. Faces tightened and voices grew measured as leaders weighed risk versus consequence. The boy watched with a small, unreadable smile that only deepened the council's unease. The hall agreed to monitor him closely while preparing contingency plans if evidence emerged. Elders gathered around the table and argued over Mu Jin's origin and motives. They debated whether he was an exile or a spy sent from outside. One elder urged observation rather than immediate punishment to gather evidence. Others complained that the boy's interruptions had hardened into arrogance. A senior proposed assigning him to the Byoja discipline group as a test and deterrent. The council agreed to monitor him closely while delegating discipline to the lower halls. Night fell over the temple as plans and watches were set. Night had settled and the lower halls carried the council's orders. Young trainees moved through dim corridors on routine patrol.